Hey, okay, so thank you, Doug, Callie, and Mary Catherine for joining me. I have three people with me today that I'm always excited when these interviews start. Now I'm like three times excited to have these folks. And I'm going to introduce them in a moment. But the reason I have these folks on is I know I'm late to the game, like by almost 15 years, but I finally saw that movie Taken with Liam Neeson. And who doesn't love Liam Neeson, right? Like I get he's like this hot hunk we want to see running around saving the day. But when I was watching the movie as a personal safety instructor, it kind of really drove me nuts that the dad was really like, you're not going to Paris and it's dangerous and it's scary. And like, he didn't even like bother to like tell her anything about how to navigate their own neighborhood, much less Paris. And then when he finally relented, he's like, well, here's my phone number and call me every day at 4. Like, so then in the movie, he whisks halfway around the world to save her. And it's like, those messages really bothered me. One, you can't go out and do anything. And I'm not going to tell you how to deal with life out there. And two, it's really beholden on me, your dad, or, big tough guy to come and save you. And that was the premise of the movie. I get that it's a movie. I get that we want to see the action. I'm not like, I love to relax and just sit back and watch a good juicy action movie. But I just really wanted to kind of dig at that. And even better, here's where the introductions come in. Doug Pattison is a former CIA operative, and the two ladies joining us are his daughters. So I know, Doug, you do interviews, you write, you are all over the place talking about with what you do. You even consult now, I believe, in the film industry. So I definitely wanted to get your take on this, but I really wanted to hear, like, how does what you have to say, like, land in the lives of 20-somethings young women who are starting their lives. So I was like, let's have your daughters on. And so thank you for joining us. Okay, I'm going to stop talking now. If y'all could just introduce yourselves really quick with your backgrounds and whatever you want to share, and we'll get into it.
Well, you obviously introed me already. So I'm Doug, right? I was a former CIA officer. I do consult on security and personal safety, and work on film and TV projects as well. I'm married to Susan, who was also a CIA officer. So
should have had her.
We had a twofer in this, but we had different roles. So our approaches to talking to our kids about things that are important were different and reflected our different backgrounds. So my role in the CIA was as a case officer. That meant I spent most of my time on the street, either trying to convince bad guys to do stuff on our behalf or stop bad guys from doing stuff against us.
Okay, I did not know that about your wife. Now I'm really kicking myself for not thinking to invite her. Callie or Mary Catherine, can you tell us a little bit about yourselves?
I'm Callie. Is my audio again?
Oh, yours sounds a little low.
Yeah, wicked low.
There we go.
There you go.
I'm Callie. I'm 23. I live in New York City. I'm a journalist. I've been in New York for about 6 years now. I went to school here and now I work here. Every time I go out, I kind of hear these messages that my dad's told me over the years of just with personal safety. And so it's been kind of interesting to grow up in rural New Hampshire to then go to a really big city and just see all the craziness and live with it every single day.
Yeah, I hear you. I love New York. Mary Catherine.
I'm Mary Catherine. I'm 18 years old. I am a freshman currently. I'm currently located in Harrisonburg, Virginia. I'm a freshman at James Madison University, where I'm double majoring in international affairs and SMAD, which is what we call media, arts, and design. And what I found really interesting is sort of, obviously, like Callie said, coming from rural New Hampshire to also, I'm kind of a little bit of rural Virginia, but I got to meet a lot of people who have very, very different backgrounds and sort of seeing the differences in the way that I was raised versus the way other people treat personal safety. So I definitely agree with Callie in that every time I go out, I'm sort of like in the back of my head, remembering sort of the things my parents taught me my whole life.
That is really cool. And I do want to talk to you about that, like how we make friends who may have different kind of experiences. But before we do, Doug, do you want to, maybe if you could just jump in with like, what are the most important things that you felt raising? And I know you have sons, but since my focus is on women claiming space, wanted to talk to you and your daughters.
Sure. I mean, I think the very first kind of one of the foundational premises of us parenting our kids was that we needed to prepare the kids by teaching them how to take risk, teaching them how to assess and take risk throughout their childhood, so that when they faced risks, when they got out of the house, they'd have the skill sets and tools available to them. So we would tell people, bringing their kids to our house, this is a place where your kids can get hurt. We don't want them to get hurt, but we have trampolines and zip lines and tree houses, and they might shoot bows and arrows, or they're going to learn to shoot guns, or they're going to, we're going to create this environment where we teach our kids how to assess risk and then talk about it, work through it, and give them tools to use in doing that. And then we would, gradually begin to take them outside into overseas trips and things like that. And we started doing that at a very early age, giving them opportunities to be exposed to these environments and talking through, how do you deal with this? What do you look for? Those sorts of things. And so it was a constant, I think, without being preachy about it, but maybe they'll tell you whether that's true or not, effort to provide the tools and the training along the way. And we would come up with, sometimes simple mnemonics like the rule of the stupids, which we can talk about, that they all know. Don't do stupid things with stupid people in stupid places at stupid times of the day or night. And the premise behind it being, it's a risk assessment matrix, right? And you may be able to do some things in the daytime with a friend who's got really good judgment, that you can't go to that same place with a friend who's got poor judgment after dark while everybody's been drinking, right?
Yeah.
And so it's assessing all of that data and then making the right decision for you and the situation you're in.
That's really interesting. I that's not one I feel like I hear a lot, but it's like, it's not about shunning risk, but about really looking for opportunity and risk.
Yeah, and I think for us, we saw friends whose kids were sheltered, and so this is one of my problems with the movie, right? It felt like Liam Neeson's daughter in the movie was very sheltered and unprepared for the world beyond. So we didn't want to shelter the kids. We wanted, because we knew they're going to leave. Like, we knew they're going to leave this nest, and they needed to be able to function out of the gate. And we had seen kids who stepped out into that world unprepared for how to assess and take risk, and literally go off the rails when they got there.
Wow. And clearly, like, you're scaling it for age, right? Like, you're doing age appropriate things. Callie, Mary Catherine, what are your thoughts on, like, your place sounds fun with the trampolines and bows and arrows. I mean, like, you could set up a resort there. Like, tell me about that experience and how you maybe felt different, maybe in or out with some of the other folks, how they related to risk.
Yeah, I mean, so we were all homeschooled until we went to high school. Bo and Callie actually went to elementary school to like 3rd or 4th grade. But for me and Sam, we were homeschooled basically our whole life. And I used to really hate that. But then now, like, as an adult, I sort of look back at my childhood, and I spent most of it outside, being able to be creative. And, I always like talking about this. My parents never really stopped me from getting physical fights with my siblings. Like, Callie and I had a physical altercation over Christmas time. And now I'm like, okay, that's good. I was able to get my aggression out in like a healthy environment and a healthy space. And, I was able to like deal with my emotions and not feel like I had to pull back on them, which I think is really important.
Yeah, for sure. And because when you pull back on those emotions, then you're like diminishing your own. Oh, wow.
That's going off of like the homeschool thing, we were really, really blessed to be able to go and do all these different trips. And like my dad mentioned, we were able to go overseas a lot. And so we were able to, he and I did a trip to Nepal when I was about 13. And it was just a really, really cool experience. And that was a great experience of learning how to grasp with personal safety in a foreign country you've never been before. It's nothing like Paris or anything like that. And so it was really, really cool to get those experiences so young, where it felt like we were able to implement these things that they were telling us. Because I feel like as a kid, your dad or your mom might be telling you these lessons over and over and over again, but you don't have a space to really implement those lessons and take action and kind of get used to them. And so by the time I feel like we became adults, it just became natural for us to be looking out for extra risks or just be extra cautious in certain areas. And so I'm really, really glad that we had that so young, where just personal safety kind of seemed like something in our everyday life.
So when you go on these trips, that was kind of your laboratory, it sounds like, to play with these different concepts your parents were teaching you. What was that? Oh, go ahead, please.
Sorry, real quick. And as talking about the age appropriate component of it, by the time they were coming out of high school, those trips became trips without us, including outside of the US, right? And so that yet continued to have that learning component to it. And there's, some failure. And we one of the things we talk about a lot is failure is okay, because there's much better learning in failure than in success.
Yeah, for sure.
So, so let's talk about those failures and figure out what can be done better. Let's figure out how we fail fast and early, so that we don't fail when it really matters later on, and because we've had that learning take place. You were going to ask about one of the trips.
I can't even remember now. I got really engrossed in that, and I was going to ask if it's okay. Like, can you talk about any of your failures? And I have plenty of failures, so I'm happy to start if you want me to get the ball rolling. But like, what are some examples of failures?
I can go in. When I was 19, I want to say, me and my girlfriends, we all did a trip up to Montreal, and
why
drive.
Sorry, Dad's on the call.
We all went up for a fun little weekend, and it was a blast. We had a ton of fun, and we decided to go more the Airbnb route to be a little bit safer than kind of hotels and hostels just at that age.
Yeah.
And one night in particular, we might have had a little bit too much to drink. It was a little too late in the night, and I lost my wallet.
Oh.
And in the wallet was kind of all my cash for the trip and all my cards and all of that. Thankfully, I didn't have my passport in it or anything like that. Yeah. But so I start freaking out. I start getting my girlfriends, just kind of telling them what the wallet looks like. We start kind of dispersing to try and find it, because we're not sure if it fell out of my purse or if it was taken or any of that. And so I remember I was out talking with the bouncer of, if you see this wallet, just stop the person and just tell me.
Yeah.
And thankfully, while I'm talking with the bouncer and about to call my bank to close my cards and stuff like that, my girlfriend runs out of the bar holding my wallet in her hand. She's like, I found it. And it was on the ground. All the cash was gone, but all the cards were still there. And over the next few days, we just kind of monitored the accounts, and thankfully nothing was taken down or anything like that.
Oh, good.
But that's the biggest one, because it kind of, I think, broke all the rules of stupids in that night.
But a relatively cheap lesson. And when a couple years later, she went with other friends to go to Europe for a longer trip and a longer time, some of those, her approach to some of that stuff had hardened. So
okay.
It's in the back of your mind at that point. And so you kind of can recognize signs of where I might be getting to that point. And then you just kind of flip the switch a bit.
Smart. And it points back to what you were saying. It's like these smaller opportunities to practice. So when the stakes are higher, it's already embodied in you, is kind of the word that keeps coming.
Definitely.
Yeah. Callie, do you have any failures you want to share with your dad on the line?
Well, I'm perfect, so
there is that.
No, I think for me, I don't really have any big travel failures, because I'm still only 18. Most of my traveling has been with my parents. I do have, there's definitely times where my parents have kind of let me fail. For example, like my college admissions process, I'm very much a control person. And I sort of kind of went in and I was like, I don't need your help. And I did. And so when April came around and I didn't like any of the choices for my schools, and it was too late to do anything else about it, I sort of had to sit down with my parents, and I was like, okay, so I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And then, together we were able to figure out a plan and figure out something to do. So I would say that my parents have done a great job through my whole life of always sort of letting me fail, but then knowing when to step in and help me and, help me.
I would say so Callie went to college in New York City. Mary Catherine was going to college in a large town, city in Virginia. doesn't have the same public transportation opportunities, et cetera. And so we've had to talk about the differences, in how they handle Uber versus being able, like, walking is radically different in the two cities as well. The social environments are very, very different. That largely, I think, Mary Catherine, you would say your town experience still mostly revolves around the school. Callie's college experience mostly revolved around the city, right? And so two very different approaches to talking about it. But talking through things like, hey, Callie had to learn very quickly to turn AirDrop off on her phone.
Yeah.
Because of random airdrops you would get from people on the subway. And that, like you don't know to do that until you have a negative experience typically,
right.
or somebody has one.
Right.
And that's not nearly as likely a case of happening for MK in the environment she's in, because she's not on transpo with, a whole bunch of strangers like that. So
that's a really good example. And that was the question I was pointing to. And I loved how you circled back, Doug, which is that distinction between environments, right? So there's New York City, there's, the hubbub there, there's public transit, there's a lot of density, but it sounds like you all grew up in, like, you had some space for those trampolines and bows and arrows. And so what was that transition like? I mean, it sounds like, Callie, you had that experience because you traveled, but how was that transition for you going from one environment to another?
It was very stark. I mean, you go from a town of a couple thousand people to a town of millions and millions of people.
Right.
And thankfully, how my kind of school did their whole thing was they put us in apartment buildings with other New Yorkers. And so you were thrown into it from the get-go.
Yeah.
So no dorm situation. You had to go grocery shopping. You had to go to the laundromat. And so you were dealing with these adult daily activities right away, which was great because you had to learn very, very quickly. Same thing with the subway. You're taking the subway every single day. And so you're learning how to handle it and how to process it. It takes a couple months, I would say, to get used to it. But when you're in that environment every day, it's pretty easy to pick up. Now, what's interesting now is I think New York in 2016 for public safety is a little bit different than it is now. There's a lot of things that I would do back in 2016, 2017, where I was just way more comfortable on the subway than I am now, just because of the uptick in certain crimes that's been happening, which is another thing we can get into later. But coming from New Hampshire to New York, like I said, it's very, very different. And so my dad and I have had a lot of different conversations about personal safety, like when it comes to just different self-defense items to have on hand, like pepper spray, tasers, things like that. I have these discussions with my friends all the time. We all have the app called Citizen, and it gives you alerts for different crimes or different police activity happening in your area. And so it can be something as simple as a man with a pipe. Or there's a fire in an apartment or something like that. And so that's just another extra precaution we've been able to take, where if you're not familiar with the city, it kind of gives you a gauge of like where a lot of that activity might be happening. And then you know whether to avoid that area or not at a certain time of day. And so it's just been picking up on all these things over time that's just been able to make me feel very comfortable and safe in the city. I feel like I have different family members who are like, are you okay? Like, do you feel safe living there? I could never live there. And at this point, I do feel safe just because I'm confident in kind of my own self-defense. Even as something as when you're listening to music on the street, either don't listen to music and just have your AirPods in, or I have the AirPods where it has transparency. So it's the outside noise is the same level as the music. So
that's great.
An extra level of just awareness, which is nice.
Yeah, which is really smart. I loved what you both pointed to. We started talking about that, like changes from your physical environment, from like, a dense place to a not so dense place or vice versa, but then, which requires adaptability. But I love what you pointed out about like, we have to keep adapting because 2016 is not 2022. And who knows what 2023 and 4 and 5 will look like. So it doesn't sound like I've learned my lessons and I know how to take the train and my dad taught me this and I'm good. So it sounds like you're still adapting.
You have to be. I mean, just last week, a woman was followed home at 4:30 in the morning, and the guy followed her into her apartment and stabbed her to death. And then A couple weeks before that, a woman was pushed in front of the train at Times Square, of all places. It wasn't even a smaller train station. And we've seen these attacks increasing, which is definitely very frustrating. A lot of them are kind of lumped into the anti-Asian hate attacks that have been going on and all those increases. But it's something that's made one of my friends in particular, she's been very anxious about this, and just when she gets these alerts, just gets her anxiety builds. And so the best way I can talk to her about it is just like, well, so keep an eye on it, but then also just arm yourself with these different items to be a little bit more comfortable walking around. But it's really, really interesting where all these attacks are also now happening midday around a lot of people, where it used to be, I think, a little bit more secluded before.
Oh, Callie, you said something that I want to pick up on, though. You talked about the anxiety. And I think it is, as we were teaching our children, one of our approaches was to try and figure out, how do you share the truth about this world that's out there, and the need to be prepared for it, without teaching them to be afraid of it, to be paranoid about it. Our view was that my wife's father used to say, with information comes inspiration. And I think that's true even in this context of, by sharing information and by talking through it and analyzing and thinking through and sharing those stories, I think it was a way to demystify it a little bit and work through, hey, you have some control here. And we don't want you to not go places. We, in fact, want you to go places, and we're going to enable you guys going places. But we're going to do so by giving you have tools and skill sets and knowledge, so that when you go, you'll be safer than the other people out there, because you don't have to outrun the bear. You just got to outrun your buddy, right? Which is another thing they've all heard me say, right? And at their core, most criminals are opportunists. Most bad folks are going to take the easiest opportunity. And so you don't have to bulletproof yourself. You don't have to harden yourself, so hard as to be in that bubble. You just have to harden yourself a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we think that we have to be like this black belt or this like super sleuth spy. And I don't think that's true. And so it's really good to hear you affirm that. And one thing, Doug, I'm curious, you had talked about the anxiety, and Callie, when you said the Citizen app, like I hear a lot about, I used to have it, I don't have it anymore, but like people would get really anxious. And so I think what you said made me think of it differently, in terms of, well, if you don't have the tools or know how to cope, of course you're going to feel anxious. That's my interpretation. Is that fair to say?
Totally, because at that point it's just kind of information overload, and you don't know what to do with this information. And like how my dad said, with control, I think is a great way to describe it. When I do chat with my friends about this, is like, while yes, this is happening and it's near our apartments and all of this stuff, it's happening. It's not like you're going to be surprised about it or anything like that down the line. Just take it and take ownership of it, I guess, is another good way to look at it, where while it is so much information, just try to parse it down, and I guess separate yourself a little bit from it at that point, because it isn't happening to you yet.
Right.
And one of the biggest things, and MK, you might chime in on this, but we've talked about a lot, was situational awareness, and knowing when to be looking at your phone and when not to, right? Because generationally, the younger generation tends to walk around a lot where they're in a pack together, and they're all on their phone at the same time, and they're not paying attention to what's going on. That's fine. Phones are tools, and you use them, and how much somebody uses it or doesn't use it is none of my real concern. But making sure that they understood the distraction component of what that is, in a time when you might not be able to afford being distracted.
Yeah, I definitely feel like that's one thing that I always felt like growing up was emphasized, is just sort of critical thinking when it comes to like situational awareness. Like if I'm at a party with my friends, sort of the first thing that I try to do when I walk in is just sort of figure out where all the exits are, just look at the different people around, figure out what's going on, figure out what sort of vibe it is, I guess. And like in any situation, I think growing up with my parents, they sort of taught us to notice everything, because most oftentimes if it's a dangerous situation, it's not going to be something that's like a giant red flag in your face. It's going to be something that
small indicators
most people wouldn't notice. And if you don't necessarily have a trained eye or that sort of background knowledge, like we were talking about, it's going to be producing anxiety because you don't know what's going on, or you're just not going to notice it.
But
and both of those can be bad things.
We didn't raise them talking about situational per se. We talked about people watching.
Yeah.
Right. And what are you seeing, and what are the stories of the people around you, and that builds that skill set.
Fascinating. Yeah. So, because situational awareness is kind of a big word and phrase to throw at like an 8-year-old.
Right.
But I love what you're saying about the people watching. How has that impacted y'all looking at, like, so Callie, you're a journalist. Mary Catherine, I'm not sure what you're studying, but do you think any of that has impacted how you engage with the world, whether professionally or just in day to day?
100%.
Okay.
And I think it's like Mary Catherine said, you're trained, or not trained, but you have been noticing these different mannerisms, or how different people react to certain situations in everyday life, and you've been doing that for your whole life, and it just becomes natural, and it's kind of hard not to. Some people might see it as nosy or too attentive, but I think it's important to have those different perspectives of people, and then even just kind of with friends, of just learning how they handle different situations. And so it's been interesting to see in crises how my friends react, if they are going to be the ones that take charge or if they don't. And then that to me gives kind of an idea of, if I'm in a crisis situation with that person, how is it going to go down? And it just gives me a little bit of background, which has been helpful.
Great. So as we learned from the beginning of this call, if I'm in charge of technology, I'm going to panic. Yeah, I get it. That's really great. Mary Catherine, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you can ask either of them and they'll tell you, like, I'm a super analytical person.
Yeah.
Like, we'll be watching a movie, especially movies. But, in any sort of environment, I'll sort of look at something and try to like take it all apart in my mind. And I do find myself doing that with people sometimes.
Oh, interesting.
Which can be a good thing and a bad thing, because, if someone's your friend, you don't always want to like be like, this is why they're acting mean, because they're, blah, 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 blah. And like, that is not always the most healthy thing. But like Callie said, I feel like sometimes I will be able to not necessarily anticipate the way someone will act, but just because I will sort of analyze what's going on and what's going on around me and the decisions people are making, I do think it just impacts the way that I interact with other people in my relationships.
Yeah.
And with both of you guys, I think when there is a crisis in your group, you are both the folks that your people turn to for help, because they know you'll be clear-headed and able to think in a critical moment, and will have processed stuff in ways that they're not ready for, which can be a burden sometimes.
That does sound like it could be a burden, but it's also a privilege. It's like you're large and in charge, sort of, as much as we can be in the world.
Well, and I was thinking about a story that happened to their brother, the middle brother between them, when he was he goes to school out west. So he's all the way across the country in San Diego. Mm-hmm. And he was at a rave, and the guy next to him started ODing and ultimately passed out on the ground. And there was literally nobody around that knew to do anything, and B, what to do. And so,
right.
But again, because of what we talked about growing up, and, his particular training going through scouting and, things like that, he had skill sets, and then, but most importantly, a willingness to apply them. And I think with all of them, they have taken a very others-centered approach to the world around them. Oh, wow. And a willingness to go out there and be out there. That's good to see.
Yeah. Well, it's being more engaged in life, right? As opposed to being a spectator.
Totally.
Yeah. But Doug, could you go back? You said it earlier, but I want to talk about your rules of stupid and
Sure.
kind of dig into those. But if you'll refresh our viewers again on that.
Yeah. Well, first off, I was going to say one thing. It just occurred to me though, the kids didn't know we were CIA officers at first.
Oh, that's a really good point. Yeah.
Right. So in the movie and Taken, Liam Neeson, he's a CIA officer. His daughter knows he's a CIA officer. And by the time they were teenagers, they did know that. But originally they did not. Right. So Callie didn't learn that we were CIA officers until she was maybe close to 10 years old.
Okay.
And Mary Catherine would have been 5-ish or so.
I remember, I don't remember a time where I didn't know, actually.
Right. So it was, but it was
young.
right around the time where your memories develop, I think. But but then for a while, it was still, they knew, but others around us, we hadn't told yet. We were still trying, because it feels like putting on somebody else's clothes when you've been undercover for so long to then be overt.
Yeah.
So anyway, it impacted kind of what and how we taught and when we began to teach things. So
that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of, I'm sorry. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like, yeah, that totally makes sense.
But back to the rule of stupid. So
yeah,
don't do stupid things with stupid people in stupid places at stupid times of the day or night. And so first off, you got to have a baseline. You got to know what is, a stupid thing or a stupid person, right? And so everybody's got to figure that out for themselves. But we all have those friends that we know are maybe a little looser on the judgment side, right? And so you might be able to go cliff jumping at a quarry near your house, which is a risky activity, but may not qualify as stupid, but it might. You got to think about it.
Right.
But if you do it with a friend who's going to push you to go higher than you're comfortable going, or to do it, eyes closed or whatever, that's going to increase your risk.
Yeah.
And then if you go do it after drinking, and if you go do it after dark when you can no longer see what you're jumping into, like each of those things, I think exponentially increases the likelihood of a catastrophic event happening.
Yeah.
And so it's an assessment tool to think through risk management in order to avoid catastrophe.
So the way I've always kind of heard that, it's a different phrase, but it applies to this, is only break one rule at a time.
Yeah.
And so if I have a stupid friend, that's good to know. So we're going to go do a really safe thing at a really safe time. Right. But if it's, okay, that's really interesting. And I want to talk about the friend thing, because I remember back in the day, this is back in the 90s, I was living in Austin to go to UT Austin and lived on Riverside where all students live. And I had a roommate who would never lock her car, and she would leave stuff in her seat. And I would just mention it to her, and she never changed. And then of course, one day, what happens is her car gets broken into, and then she was better about it then, but it made me nervous because I was like, if she's going to be loosey-goosey with the car, is she going to leave our apartment unlocked, that kind of thing. And so we were really good friends and we talked about it, but her behavior really never changed. And I didn't have the skills to really get her to change her behavior. What are y'all's thoughts on that if you're hanging out with somebody who isn't making great choices?
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say I've kind of had a lot of friends who are in the opposite direction, where they've been kind of more overly cautious and more overly anxious.
Okay.
Bringing them down.
Yeah.
From where it's, while anxiety is warranted in some situations, it's taking it from fear level to just more cautious level. Because it's harder to, like, if you're on this trip to Europe, it's hard and you're anxious about the trip, that's totally fine and normal.
Yeah.
But if that anxiety turns into fear of the trip, then it's really hard to enjoy it. And in my sense, also still be very aware if you're just looking for fear in every single situation. And so we've had a lot of discussions with my friends about that, of just kind of handling going out on a late night and just kind of assessing the situations and things like that. Though I have had friends who are definitely a little bit more loosey-goosey with the rules. And at that point, it comes to just being there for them in that situation as much as you can. One thing all my friends do is we share our locations with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a friend who were on a night out and they want to go home with this guy they met at the club. I'm not going to stop them. I'm going to warn them of what things might happen and things like that.
Right.
But in the end of the day, it's their decision, and I'm going to support them in either way. But at the same time, I'm going to be watching their location. I'm going to be checking in, ask them to check in with me. And so the best thing that I can do is just be a support at that point and be that person who can watch out for them if something does go wrong. And in the end, I've had friends reach out to me where I had a girlfriend last summer who she texted me, she's like, hey, I'm going out on this date, going to a neighborhood I've never really been in. Can you just watch my location and make sure that things are okay? And so that's really strengthened my relationships and my friendships, where we have just become this total support system for each other, even if we are more anxious or we are a little bit more careless.
I love that your friend reached out to you and said that. And so she was like still going to go have that date and have fun, but she thought ahead to like have her. I love that. Are all young women doing that these days? Because I wasn't doing that. I love it. Where do you think that's coming from?
I think it has to do with the definitely with dating apps. I think because we know so little about who we're going to meet.
Yeah.
I mean, a good portion, we do our stalking. We try and find them on LinkedIn and see how much
Sure.
information we can find out and how much their parents' house cost and all of that.
Yeah.
But
Dad's learning here.
No. We've talked about all this sort of stuff. My kids know that I like stalking. We've been stalking everybody our whole lives.
So that's the secret, stalk. Okay.
Well, be prepared with information.
That's it. Yeah.
You don't want to accidentally drop their dog's name that they didn't tell you.
Right. Yeah.
But so basically, but at the same time, you don't know this person. And so I think because a lot of people are meeting more through apps and less through mutual friends or at house parties, or even in a big city like New York, you're not meeting them on a college campus anymore. And so I think because there's so chance for error, I think a lot of more people are taking extra safety precautions, like having their friends know where they are, or just even telling your roommate, hey, I'm going on this date, I should be back tonight, or I don't know if I'm going back tonight. Like all of that is just extra precautions here and there. And the same thing with holding pepper spray or a taser. I don't think I know a single girl in New York who doesn't have some type of self-defense item on them at all times.
Yeah.
And by the way, the kids still share their location with us, right? Not because we don't trust them, but because it's just an additional mechanism for us to have their backs.
Right. Mary Catherine, I have another question that I want to get your thoughts on, but do you have anything to add to this portion here?
Yeah, I mean, me and my friends definitely do the same thing. We all have each other's location on Find My iPhone, Life 360, and Snapchat, just in case, I'm like, okay, if my phone dies and I log onto someone's phone, then they can see where I am. And we're very good about if we go to a party together, we leave together.
That's great.
There's rarely an occasion. I've once, maybe twice, left a friend at a party, but that was because I had met the guy prior to, it was not I would never leave someone if they just met that person.
Right.
We're honestly we do our best with that, especially because all of us are freshmen, especially at the beginning of the year. We were all pretty wary because you sort of get preyed on a little bit because they all sort of older, creepier guys can sort of tell that you're younger. And so we've really tried to be really intentional about taking care of each other, especially when we're out. And also listening to when people say, don't go to this fraternity house because, they sexually assaulted this girl that I know, or they spiked a drink. We've really been pretty open about sharing information with each other. And
that's great.
That comes with a level of trust. So yeah, I definitely agree. Especially with Tinder is a really big thing here. Everybody uses Tinder, and it that kind of stuff does kind of freak me out a little bit because you don't really know, who the person is, of course. But yeah, safety is definitely sort of in a college town. You hear about these things happening a lot, not as much as I'm sure Callie.
One of the things I like that you shared though is, I don't know if you guys remember, but when Mom and I would talk about scuba diving, one of the mnemonics we used from scuba diving was plan your dive, dive your plan.
Mhm.
right? And I see both of you guys typically doing that. Like you guys set a plan when you're going out on those evenings, and then you guys pretty much stick to the plan, or stick with the group. And if the plan changes because the whole group's changed the plan, and you kind of see that all the way through. And I think that's an important premise or principle to keep in mind from a personal security perspective, is that plan your dive your plan, which then gives you freedom and flexibility to change, because you've gone through all that pre-work of thinking about what it is you're going to do without getting all anal about it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and I'm like, first of all, I'm like, I wish I was you when I was in my 20s. I'm just so wowed and impressed. And I love what you're saying about your friends. And I feel like that's one thing that has been my saving grace when I was going out and doing stupid things. It was, I had a girlfriend or a group of girlfriends that backed me up. And I think that that's something that's maybe not talked about enough, because we're just told the city's dangerous or whatever is dangerous. And with your friends who have your back, it's like it's a whole new world of opportunity. Very cool. And so, Mary Catherine, my question for you, or for all of you, but I wanted to just kind of get my finger on the pulse of being in school. Like, what is it that people are talking about the most in terms of being afraid? Is it, I don't know, is it COVID? Is it catching that? Is it, the guy jumping out from behind the bushes? What are the biggest concerns that you're hearing from your friend group?
A big thing, because we are in a college town, like a big thing is spiking drinks.
Okay, yeah.
That's like a really big thing. You're always hearing about it. And then also we had some like recent issues at our school. There was like some Virginia colleges have been having some issues recently. There was a few shootings, not here, but kind of close by. And so that, of course, is always scary. I think I've sort of noticed with a lot of our things that have been happening, there isn't always consistent patterns. But I think that when you're sort of in a high stress environment, like a college can be stressful, you sort of are always on the lookout for, somebody who might seem a little bit off, and they might pull something that's not good.
Yeah.
Or somebody who has been really struggling in school and hasn't talked to anybody about it, and then they might do something that is not healthy. The big thing though, especially because I'm part of Greek life, like the spiking drinks and sexual assault is like a big thing that people are always sort of talking about, I guess.
So, and what's your biggest strategy for the spike drink situation? How do you handle that?
I bring my own drinks. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't take anything that's not a closed container.
Okay. So if it's
and
a bottle of
we talked about them
beer,
when they were growing up, right?
Okay.
Talking about if somebody buys you, if you have a drink and you set it down to go dance, you got to go get a new drink. You don't pick that drink back up.
No.
Right. Callie, tell me about commuting in New York. Like, so there's like all these crazy things that can happen. How do you kind of move through that space to make sure that you're not a statistic or a target?
So in New York, we got walking, we have the subway, we have the bus, and then taxis and cars and stuff like that.
Mhm.
I would say for the longest time, my really only mode of commuting was the train. And then over the past, from between COVID and then the crimes growing in the past year, I've taken the train less and less. I'm not commuting to the office every single day, so that's taking another risk down. And then since these kind of a lot of homeless people have been like, there's been a lot of altercations with homeless people on the subways lately. And so I've kind of come to this baseline of, if I'm alone, I'm not taking the subway past 11 or midnight. If I'm with a group of friends and we're just going 2 stops into Brooklyn and back, that's totally fine. I'm with a group. But
Right.
if I'm going on a date and it goes late, I'm gonna take a car.
Okay.
And that's just been safer for me.
Yeah.
Now, granted, there also are altercations with Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, and at that point, you just have to be extra careful. You're double checking the license plate of the car that you're getting into.
Yeah.
There are other car services. There's one called Revel, and their cars that they use are bright blue Teslas. So there's no like
You know who they are. Yeah.
you know exactly what car you're getting into because it's this bright blue car. It's not some black Toyota that you're trying to figure out the license plate or anything like that. So
Right.
But everybody else around them knows whose car
Right.
that is too,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, good
So-
point. Yeah,
So
good point.
that's another kind of thing you have to think about. And so for me, it's just being extra cautious of where I am. And so, like I said earlier, with my AirPods, if I have them in, I'm usually not listening to music, or I set it at the transparency level where I can hear the outside sounds and the music at the same time. And that's been helpful. Thankfully, I haven't had any really bad altercations on the subway, besides just kind of like a little groping when I'm getting off. And at that point, there's not much I can do about that. And if I don't want to get into make the altercation bigger than it is, I have to assess the risk of, do I make this altercation back? Do I interact with that person if
Right.
it's something that's not totally affecting my day?
Right.
And so at this point, I try to take the bus a lot more if I have the chance, just because I would say the people I've seen on the bus are a little bit more aware. They're a little bit safer because you have to be more conscious of where the stops are, because they don't announce them on the bus.
Ah, okay.
They just kind of paying attention to where you are.
Yeah. So they're building in awareness by not announcing the stops. I love it.
Right. And so I've felt a little bit more comfortable on the bus in the past kind of 12 months. So I've been doing that just to get across to dinners or up and down them in the city. So that's been nice.
Yeah. What are some stories that the two of you have maybe exchanged? Because Callie, you've finished school and you've been there, done that, and then Mary Catherine is like in your first year, correct, Mary Catherine?
Mhm.
And so, like, what are some of the conversations to your little sister and the big sister that you have? And I know Dad's here, so we'll keep it at the dad level. But yeah, I'm just curious, like how, like, because your parents clearly have prepared you to engage with the world, but I'm just like, they don't know everything, right? And we're learning so much. Like, I didn't know about the whole AirPod transparency thing, so thank you. I'm still old-fashioned with my wires.
Can I just interject though on the AirPod thing?
Yeah.
Because I think one of the things that Callie taught me was that having the AirPods in but off is also a good thing, because having the AirPods in stops people from talking to you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I use them. I might listen to music more, or podcasts more, now that I know about the transparency thing, but yeah, it's mainly don't talk to me. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think one conversation I've had with MK is, if you, and maybe this wasn't like a direct conversation, but just kind of as we discuss personal safety, it's when you aren't comfortable in a situation, like if you're walking to Walmart across the street and you just want that extra safety, just call someone. And so she and I talked on the phone while she's walking to the store and things like that.
Right.
And even if it's more like in your subconscious of, oh, I feel safer, you do feel safer when you're on the phone and you have this extra person with you, when technically you're by yourself.
Yeah.
And I think we've also talked about just kind of being aware at parties and stuff like that. I know some companies have started to do extra things, like you could have a scrunchie that turns into a cup cover, or a certain nail polish
Oh, wow.
up on different spikings for stuff like that. And so like I'll always urge her and my friends to purchase those items just as an extra precaution. But I think in general, like just sharing stories of parties of like, you're with friends, right? Like that's totally fine. Like you're not by yourself, just being aware that the other is safe.
Yeah. Yeah. Mary Catherine, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we just continually, and I try to do this with all my siblings, just try and check in about like when, like I talk to Callie pretty consistently. And yeah, definitely, like I do walk to Walmart when I have to go, and it's 10 minutes away.
Yeah.
And so I'll always call Callie, or I'll call my parents, or I'll call my roommate who was like in my room. Or if I'm walking home from the library and I'm on the other side of campus, because I do have kind of a big campus, I'll call somebody and just talk to them. And I think that me and Callie just sort of communicate, like sometimes, you know, if she sees them out on my Snapchat story, we'll text each other at the end of the night or something like that, just checking in, which has been really nice and good.
Okay. I have a question about the calling. You're wearing your ear pods when you're on the conversation, right? Are you holding the phone up? I'm a Gen Xer, so I'm thinking about this in old, but but I really want to know, like, how do you do that? Like,
I typically have my AirPods in.
Okay.
I don't know if that's controversial. I do not know how to do that transparency thing. I don't think we can do that on
I think
mine.
for the AirPod Pros, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not.
Oh, okay.
But
Um,
so I think either like we'll FaceTime because then it's you could
Ah.
show someone something.
Yeah.
Very beneficial.
or I'll just hold my phone like this.
Exactly. Or
Like-
just
Okay.
And a lot of times when Mary Catherine will call us while she's walking across campus, she'll actually have it on FaceTime but be listening through her AirPods.
Okay.
And we'll just get this movement of her screen going like this. So we're not actually looking at her, but the camera's on,
Yeah.
you know, if something's going on. And so, and yet she's looking around at what's going on around her.
Thank you for clarifying, because again, like in my old person's brain, I'm thinking like that's actually could be a distraction, but the way you're using the technology is your eyes and ears are up and out while you're engaging with this person on the phone. Okay, thank you for explaining that to me, because I never understood that approach, and that I think the way you're doing it makes so much sense. Because yeah, I want my like hands free. I want to know what's going on. Yeah, I totally get you. I get you. Okay, I have a question here. I think you all have already answered it, and you're very like early on, but I'm going to ask it anyway, which is, do you all feel more or less confident than, say, your peers because of what your parents have taught you? Are you just like, oh my God, the world's so dangerous and I just going to stay in under covers? Or like, we've already talked about this, but I just have to like ask you anyway, just to articulate, hammer that home.
Absolutely. I definitely would say yes. Not in kind of like an arrogant, cocky way, but it's
Yeah.
just kind of because we grew up in this atmosphere of constantly talking about self-defense and safety, even if it wasn't direct.
Yeah.
I think it's just always something that is on my mind. One thing my dad does when we go to a restaurant is he always sits with him facing the door so he can see everyone coming in and out. And I think
Right.
that's something that me and all my siblings have just adopted naturally.
Yeah.
And so it's things like that where I think we're always thinking about something. Or if someone comes into a restaurant that looks a little bit shady, while we're not totally assessing the situation, it's just kind of knowing and keeping an eye on. Or like Mary Catherine said, you go into a party, you know where all the exits are, things like that, where it's just kind of a quick little thought and it's not much more than that, but you're always thinking about it.
Yeah. Mary Catherine, what are your thoughts on being more or less confident because of this experience?
I was going to bring up the chair thing. I do that in every place. I do it in our dining hall. And my friends are like, you're so weird. And I'm like, no, I just have to do this. Like, it just makes me feel so much more comfortable.
Yeah.
And if I'm in a classroom, if I'm picking a seat in the class, you know, I like to sort of I'll sit down and I'll take note of like who's around me. And, you know, I think that growing up, like, I know we've touched on this a few times, but like, we always sort of discussed how it was really important not to live in fear.
Yeah.
And I do think that I'm sometimes more cautious about things that are kind of stupid, versus like somebody might be like, oh, it's not that big of a deal or whatever. And that's not me being fearful necessarily. It's just me being, you know, a little bit more, okay, let's think about this. Let's think about this decision. And I know we've also talked about this, but, you know, the people watching, you know, I will sit in a room, a classroom, a restaurant, and, you know, sometimes we'll spend half the meal as a family talking about the people around us and
Yeah.
the dynamics of the people around us. I remember sitting in the airport as a kid and sitting there with my brother and making up stories for different people. And like, it's always sort of been a huge part of our family dynamic, is not in this like us against the world type thing, but us and how we see the world, and
Yeah.
sort of how that dynamic is.
Yeah.
Did I ever talk to you guys about the station nightclub fire? I wondered if I ever brought that one up, because to me, it's just such a good object lesson in situational awareness, right? And Beverly, do you know the story of this?
I do. Yeah, I do know the story. Yeah. It's
Have you
very
ever
tragic.
used it as a situational awareness?
I have
tool?
not. I mean, there was a special one like within the last few months, and I saw all the holes and what happened, but I haven't really used it as a tool.
So,
No.
Long story short, there was a nightclub in Rhode Island that regularly had hard rock bands come in, and they had a band come in that was super popular. They sold out the place, and they had all kinds of pyrotechnics that they used. Ultimately, the pyrotechnics got out of hand. the place caught on fire. The emergency exits were actually chained shut. And over 100 people died. Well over 100 people died in this nightclub from the fire and smoke inhalation. And many of them actually died in the doorway trying to get out of the building because so many people were trying to get out at one time. And what nobody realized was the entire front of the building was actually glass. It had all been painted over black and then had sound dampening drapes hanging from it. But nobody had paid attention going in to how the building was built. And had anybody started throwing things through those glass windows, everybody in the place would have lived, right? And so to me, it's just such a really good lesson about everybody went in one way and they tried to leave the same way and they all died. And those that tried to get to, there's all kinds of problems with the nightclub and the things that they did wrong that resulted in death. This is not taking blame away from them, but it's trying to give you guys more empowerment to think about this environment and things you could have done. And while it's really hard to throw something through a window, like mentally to get over that, I'm doing something wrong here. Had somebody taken one of the high top tables that was in that bar and thrown it through the window, people would have realized that those were windows and not walls. And the difference between a window and a wall would have meant survival for all of those people.
I did not know that about those windows. That's horrific. Wow.
And so it really is a horrible story, but there's some really good situational awareness learnings in that, because it's not just about paying attention to where the exits are sometimes, because they might be chained shut like they were in this case.
Right.
Or everybody going through, it's paying attention to the totality of it around you.
Well, and also too, and this is what I really love to focus on with asphalt anthropology. It's like how we use our space and we think, oh, that door is for going in and out of, or this is for that. And one thing I really go on about like phones, because people, to me, it's just very general, like, don't look at your phone. And it's like you said, Doug, earlier, it's a tool. Like maybe I'm lost and me not looking at my phone is more dangerous than looking at my phone. So for me, it's about encouraging people to, okay, where can I look at my phone? I'm going up this long escalator nobody else is on. Totally cool to look at my phone. I can step into a store. And so I love what you're saying, because it's about, it sounds like just rethinking how you use that space. It's not necessarily like an escalator is for going up, but hey, it's a long one is a great place to make a phone call or take a text, that kind of thing. I'm so excited to talk to y'all. That's why I'm like tongue tied.
Well, and I think you're getting at the crux of so much of what is actually self-defense is everybody wants a super simple, always works answer.
Yeah.
And the only real answer is always, it depends.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? And so Mary Catherine mentioned critical thinking skills.
Yeah.
Like your best weapon is your brain.
Yeah.
And training your brain, to use it and think about these issues.
Well, what I'm really learning from you all is how much it's like starting young as much as possible. Of course, we don't all have that luxury, right? And what can you do? But it's really about like practicing and embodying early. And those are some of the techniques I try to instill in navigating through the city. Like, you don't take a corner like tight, right? You just kind of, what the cops call pieing. I think of it as carrying a big martini tray around the corner. Would you want to go around a corner I was a waitress. So would you want to go around a tight corner with like all these martini trays? No, you want to have that visibility. And so that you have to think about it a few times and then it becomes a habit.
But I think it also involves trust, because I wanted to be able to trust my kids when they were going to go out into the world. And when I go back to the movie Taken and Liam Neeson, I felt like he and his daughter didn't have a good trust-based relationship.
Good point. Yeah.
And he hadn't done his job and she was going to conceal things from him. And I recognize, don't get me wrong, there are 100% things that these young ladies have concealed from me throughout life. Sure. But at the end of the day, they've never doubted, I don't think, that my advice was trying to be in their best interest,
right,
and to help prep them for this world they were going out into. And so I really, that to me is one of the frustrating parts about that movie, is they start from a lack of trust, and it's really hard to recover from that, that position.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think he was being, that stereotype of the the trouble, surly, law enforcement guy who doesn't have, so they kind of set it up that way. But like what you're saying, Doug, and this whole conversation, to me, I'm learning more from this than that whole movie, in terms of how to navigate through the world is really great. So I have one final question for you all, which is, if the three of you were putting together a school for young women getting ready to go out in the world, go to college, start a career, whatever, like, and if you're going to run them through the school, what would the curriculum be? What would you have them learn?
I think right away is just having a general knowledge of different self-defense items.
Mm-hmm.
Like just knowing how to use pepper spray, how to
Mm-hmm.
use a taser, how to just, and having them on you. Do you keep it in your purse? Do you keep it on your keychain? Things like that, because I think that's just such a basic level of security outside of general awareness and things like that. And when you have that, it's easy to talk about it with your friends, and just making it a little bit more casual, I think, is really, really helpful, and just increasing that general awareness among young women everywhere. And I'm glad to have those conversations with my friends every day of like, oh, what taser do you have? What pepper spray do you have? It's just, you're increasing your knowledge all the time of learning.
Yeah.
If they've had to use it in that situation, did they like it? Or not, did they like the situation, but did they
Sure.
like the item like worked and all of that stuff? And so I think that's a huge one.
Yeah.
Because most of the time, I think when we go to do this research and we look up what items work, there's not a ton out there. It's you're having to do all this independent research by yourself and figuring out what's the best one for you. When I think it's really helpful if it's a general discussion we've had all the time of how to use them, where to get them, etc.
Yeah. Mary Catherine, what would you include in the curriculum?
I think I would probably include a class. I know this is like all I talked about, but like how to read people 101. I found that like my best skill set, like my dad said, is your brain, and being able to sort of figure out even just like a basic understanding of, someone's body language, someone's, the way that they're talking, the way that they're acting. How does that, reflect on their sort of risk to you as a person? And also, I think it's one thing we've talked about a little bit, and we were just sort of talking about with the trust. It's really important to know when to ask for help and to know when to be like, okay, this is something I need to rely on my friends for. Like we talked a little bit about the sort of bonding together friendship thing. That's really important. And also, I know when I need to call my dad for help, and I know that I can call my dad for help. And I think that that's also like, sometimes girls get themselves in situations, or I shouldn't say girls end up in situations where, things happen that are bad, and they're afraid that it was their fault, and they're afraid they don't know how to ask for help. And it's important to realize that, you can always ask for help, and you should always, have people that you can turn to. And it might not necessarily be one singular person, but, knowing who in your life is going to best support you in the different areas that you might need help, I think is really important.
Okay. This is great. Doug, what do you have?
So I would probably want some practical exercises on situational awareness.
Okay.
And maybe some, some simple games that teach the concept. So the Kim game. I don't know if you're familiar with Rudyard Kipling's story, Kim.
No.
But in the Jungle Book, right, he works in, there's a story about Kim, who was a young Indian boy who was going to be trained to be a spy. And basically what's called now the Kim game was they would show him a tray of stones and other things, and he would have a certain amount of time to look at it, and then they would conceal it, and he would have to relay what he'd seen.
Yeah.
And there's multiple variations of this you can do, but what it's teaching is observation and recall skills.
Right.
And so, whether it's matching card games or things like that, you can use that to teach the concepts of how to apply that and training your brain to do that. And then you can take that out into a street environment, perhaps with a couple role players, and then ask people to describe the scenario that they've seen or describe what that. So I do some of that. And then I also think, I do think some physical martial arts training should be included, and not necessarily to teach a specific skill set, but I do think it's important to teach young ladies that it is okay to get aggressively violent when it matters, And if you've never been in a situation where you've had to be violent,
Yeah.
that's a really hard thing to break through.
Yeah. Yeah.
Men and women, but I think particularly for women, like to know when to go and to go all in, like that's a really, like, that's a primal thing that's hard to break through. And
Yeah.
I think just teaching young ladies what it means to grapple with somebody or to punch literally as hard as you can if you need that. I think something that introduces them to that concept is important.
That's great. Yeah. Wow. This is a great curriculum. I want to go to that school. Is there anything I didn't think to ask you all that you think is really important that we should talk about in this conversation?
You mentioned a little not too long ago kind of how we grew up in a situation where this situational awareness is what we grew up with. It was something we're always talking about, and not everyone has that opportunity. And I think one thing that our family did, that we tried to reach out to our friends. And so for families who didn't kind of have similar upbringings, but they, like, I had a friend who, when she was in her teens, she went to Singapore to visit her boyfriend's family, and my dad did an entire security sit down with her.
Oh, I love it.
This information of how to be aware when traveling, when in the country, and all of that. And so I think just making those conversations more common, I think, would be really helpful, because there is so much fear out there about these situations, and the best way we can get rid of fear is take control of it. And so having those conversations is hugely helpful. And so I'm glad that I have them constantly with my friends of how to take more control. And I'm really glad that we did that growing up with our family and friends.
I did that a bunch.
Which is extraordinary. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So, yeah, I mean, I would have friends over and we'd be sitting around the dinner table, and I always, sometimes it was annoying. Like, sometimes it'd be like, Dad.
My dad.
We'd be like talking about something, and my dad would like relate it into a lesson.
Yeah.
Or
as dads do.
Yeah. I went on a trip with my mom and a bunch of other people in 8th grade. Like, it was a school related thing. And I remember my dad sitting down with the entire group, and we did a whole safety videos on pickpocketing, videos on this and this and this. And, I told my friends, before they went abroad, I was like, oh, do you want my dad to talk to you about this?
I love it.
And also earlier we mentioned sort of when you have like friends who are influential, who might be making bad decisions. One thing I always noticed with my family is they always would, if they knew we had a friend who maybe they were kind of iffy about, they would always encourage them to be at our house or offer support. There was never an instance, I mean, not in my memory, that my parents were ever like, you can't hang out with that person.
Yeah.
Rather than, come over and let's hang out and let's talk and let's, offer support to this person who may not have a stable home life.
Wow. Yeah.
So
that's powerful. And I think everything you're saying is really the opposite of that movie, right? Where the dad was stoking fear and really not equipping her at all for the horrible situation she landed in.
He created part of the situation that ultimately she got herself into.
Yeah.
By not training her, by not creating trust, by, all that sort of stuff. And so he had to kind of reap that a little bit.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I know, again, he's handsome. We all want to see that, but it's not how we actually make ourselves and our loved ones safer with those messages. Very cool. I think that's a great place to wrap, unless you guys have anything else. This has been so amazing. Anything?
I'm good. Thank you. It was really fun for me, fun to listen to these great young ladies here talk about how, they use some of this.
Well, and I saw you beaming at certain times too, as the proud dad. They've been listening and applying, which is so sweet to see and great to see.